Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Cosmic Connection. Today, we're going to be doing some audience Q&A and also checking in with the Mars square Saturn energy that probably most of you are feeling at this point. But some of the questions we're going to cover are we really, quote unquote, made of star stuff? And is there science to show that? We're also going to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's chart and what made her so interesting. And then we're going to touch on evolutionary astrology. So we have a lot to talk about today. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with Rick Merlin Levine. Rick, it's hard for me to break the old habit of the things that I wanted to say around your name, but I did it. And
it's always hard for me to say, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rick Merlin Levine, blah, 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 blah.
You know what? We could start doing that. Like I could just pause and then you could jump in.
Yeah,
all right.
Let's write the script for the show live while we're having the show.
I think that's a really good idea. Yeah, let's do that. All right, everybody. Let's start with this first thing around the build up to Mars square Saturn, which is exact next Tuesday, right?
Yes, and of course, putting that into perspective, we have to remember that we have these three planets in Capricorn and the sign Aries is 90 degrees or square to the sign of Capricorn. So we have these three planets that have been hanging out in Capricorn, the three heavyweights of Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And Mars in Aries has made squares to each of the three of them. First to Jupiter at the lower degree, then to Pluto, and then to Saturn the end of August. Now that Mars has turned retrograde, Mars is backing up into the identical squares in reverse order, and its square on Tuesday, the 29th, is the first of the three squares that it will make retrograding, but it's the second time that it's actually squared Saturn. The first time was just a little over a month ago, and the third time won't be until next January when everything is different. So the thing to keep in mind is that when there are slow, what we call heavyweight planets, they set the background, they set the low note. It's like in a rock band, they're the drummer and the bass player. You know, they're and the guitar riffs that sound like they're really high frequency and really like that's what you're watching is the you know that those high frequency notes always have to conform to the lower bass notes of the boom, 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 and the boom, 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 the drum and the bass player. So the drum and the bass player are the Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn moving through Capricorn. And into this, we have Mars being a little bit higher frequency. It's still slower moving than Earth, but it's certainly faster compared to the others. And so in August, September, October, November, December, and January, Mars is like triggering or playing riffs or amplifying or making this low chronic situation more acute for these certain moments in time. And that's part of what's going on now. But into that, we have even higher frequency Mercury moving through Libra, which over the past couple of days has, and actually over the past week, Mercury from Libra has squared Jupiter and Pluto, and just the day before yesterday, Saturn. So that's all really fresh and into this whole mixture of Mercury, like in a tug of war, opposite Mars, with both Mercury and Mars making this square to all these planets in Capricorn. This is called the T-square. Into that, yesterday, the moon moved into Capricorn. And that becomes the trigger. The moon is in Capricorn for a couple of days every month. Once a month, the moon makes its run through around the zodiac, and the moon is in every sign for 2.25, 2.5 days. This time, however, when the moon is moving through Capricorn, and when it's joining up with, over the next day and a half, when it's joining up with Jupiter, then Pluto, then Saturn, it's also squaring Mercury and also squaring Mars. And it's already just yesterday squared the Sun at the very beginning of Libra and Chiron at the very beginning of Aries. And so the moon is basically activating by square or conjunction 3 planets in Capricorn, 2 planets in Aries, and 2 planets in Libra. And that's 7 planets that are all tied up in this kind of hard energy conflict. And conflict is not bad. Conflict is just conflict. It depends what we do with it, and it depends how we resolve it. But that's what's going on right now. That's why people are angry. They're fearful. They're sad. I mean, often grief is really behind a surface, anger. I mean, it's like we're having a really hard time, and I don't care where you are on any of what I call the bipolar issues, whether it's, presidential politics or vaccines or climate change or Black Lives Matter or systemic racism, whatever the issues are, we're all being stretched by this cardinal initiatory energy of the frustration of Mars. Frustration because Mars is hot. It's the angry red planet. Mars is the red. Every planet's associated with a metal, and Mars is associated with iron. And iron is basically iron is what makes hemoglobin red. You see, because iron burns, and when iron burns, that's rust. And so oxygen, which is what creates a fire, when the iron in our blood cells meets with oxygen, that makes the blood red. And it's that red, angry warrior fighter energy of Mars that right now is at home in Aries, because Mars spends about 6-7 weeks in each sign as it goes through its phases. But when it turns retrograde, instead of spending 6 or 7 weeks in a sign, it spends 6 months in a sign. And so we have Mars now over amping because it's in its own sign where it gets angry really easily. And on top of that, it's retrograde, which means it's closer to Earth, which means its signal is louder, which means that it's even hotter and redder and angrier and more impulsive and more confrontational than usual. And it's squaring Saturn, and Saturn saying, not on your life. Shut up. Be quiet. Go home. I'm the authority. You have no right to get angry or to get mad. Just suck air and go away. And that's why people are angry.
Wow.
That frustration has to come out. Mars and Saturn are like the gas pedal and the brake. And when Mars and Saturn are square, it's like every time we hit the gas pedal to express our anger or to motivate ourselves or to go somewhere or to do something, at the same time, the brake goes down and we're slowed up. And so we can't disassociate the hot from the cold, the energy from the repression, the expression from the restraint, the gas pedal from the brake pedal.
If you were talking to a client right now and you saw this in their chart, how would you advise them to work with this energy most effectively?
That's really tricky because we don't want to bury the energy, because when we don't express it, the saying, that which we resist persists. And so we don't want to deny it or suppress it. We don't want to avoid it, because when we do, it grows louder and it wants to be expressed, which makes us then push harder at burying it. And what happens is that when we bury something sufficiently, it flips out, and then we encounter it as a projection, and we get to blame it on this group or that politician or this situation. And that's what's happening. And so we have to find ways to move the energy. And some of them are simple and some of them are complicated. I mean, very simply, being physical, moving, taking walks. If you're in an apartment or in a city and you because of quarantine or whatever, you can't go out, well, move in your house, exercise, jump up and down, do jumping jacks, do yoga postures, anything that can help to move the energy, because blocked energy, locked up energy creates dis-ease, creates the need for it to express one way or another, and that way can often be uncomfortable. So we need to move the energy. Secondly, we need to keep reminding ourselves, like a mantra that we say again and again and again. We need to keep reminding ourselves it's not about the immediate expression of winning every battle. I've been saying for a few weeks now, it's easy to win every battle and still lose the war, because we could be so exhausted by fighting every battle that we have no energy to apply when we actually need it to get closure on this whole time period. And so from that standpoint, while we're figuring out ways to bleed the excess energy, to work with it, to move it, we also have to keep our eye on the distance, on the prize, because it won't be until January when Mars, even though Mars turns direct in November, it doesn't clear the squares. It doesn't hit the third and final square moving direct to Pluto until Christmas Eve, and to Jupiter and Saturn until after presidential inauguration, until January, I think 13th and 22nd, I think are the dates. And so our energy is needed, and we need to be putting the energy in the bank. We need to be putting it into a savings account rather than just wasting it. And then the third thing is to actually figure out things that we can do that are constructive towards the long haul. I mean, voting. I'd like to say I don't care who you vote for. I actually do. But I'd rather have you vote for whomever you're going to vote for than not vote at all. Because right now there are big things at stake, and it's not a matter of picking the candidate that you think is going to be perfect or picking the candidate that you think is the lesser of two evils. It's a matter of, is democracy going to be sustained? And so from that standpoint, anything that we can do that involves us, engages us in our own enlightenment when it comes to gathering information and spreading that information, sharing that information, even though this is tricky, because when we share information, that pisses other people off. And so there we have this dance with that Mars overamping and the bleeding off of energy by getting into unnecessary ego conflicts and confrontations that are not about the real issue. And so it's really a matter of anger management and energy expression. Do things that are constructive, physical things even. You got that junk room that you've been thinking about, cleaning up for the last 4 years. Well, attack it. Do something with your physical energy that actually allows you to do something constructive. If it's a social cause, whatever it is, do it. Get out and experience what it's like to work towards something that's useful, but it's not useful just to stir up anger, to troll people, to exacerbate the tensions and the conflict that's already there. We have to work through this. We have to find common ground. And that's another piece of what we can do constructively with Mars. And that is seek ways to find common ground, even with people who we are different from. I'm reminded, and we'll get to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's chart in a little bit, but I'm on the Ruth Bader Ginsburg side of the political spectrum, and her great adversary for years was Antonin Scalia. And I don't know if you know this, but they were best of friends. I mean, their families were friends. They ate together. They cooked together. They went to opera together. This is Ruth and Antonin, and yet they were bitter enemies philosophically and politically. But it's an example of how an intelligent democracy should work. I mean, I am personally, and I know everyone's different, and your opinions can be different, and that's totally cool. But I was never a fan of Antonin Scalia. I mean, his judgments and his rulings on things to me were often frightening. But the fact that we can actually agree to disagree and then to put our best foot forward I was talking with Gail earlier, and she was telling me that she had read that Scalia and Ginsburg would often tell each other what they were writing in their write-ups and help each other with their write-ups, even though they didn't agree with it, because they wanted the excellence of getting the information out there in a way that created real dialogue. And somehow that's what politics used to be. I wouldn't say it was like that, but it was more like that, rather than just having people scheming to be correct at the expense of losing democracy as a functioning concept, even if it fell short or falls short of perfection.
Wow, that is really inspiring. They were connected at another level. They were connected at a value level, obviously, versus, well, and even higher than values, because their values sounds like they were pretty different. But they were
connected by the commonality of wanting to be in a country that actually aspired towards what their goals were. And although they might have had different ways of reaching them, they still respected each other enough to understand that people actually can have different perspectives. We've lost that.
So good. Okay, so what you've said is that we're feeling all this energy for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things happening all at once. That conflict, tension, anger, sadness, these things, grief can be coming up for people. That there's 5 different things we can do in this time. We can get active and actually physically move the energy. I had a mom at the homeschool community say, I can't settle down. I've been trying to get quiet and get calm, and I just can't. And I was like, don't try. Like, actually get sweaty and just get, move your body. This isn't the time to try and get calm in that same way. Don't waste our energy. So don't be like shooting it in directions that are completely unproductive. Do something productive. Do something useful, something constructive, and preferentially physical. Don't stir the pot just to exacerbate energy. This isn't the time to come in and just play devil's advocate for the fun of seeing what will happen. It's probably not going to have the best results. And then find common ground and seek ways to find it, and find ways that you're more alike than different, and connect with people there. And
Six.
All right.
Be kind and practice compassion.
Love it. Okay. The what you're saying about Ruth, they had a common vision. They had a common vision that was bigger than their different ways of accomplishing it, is basically. So I think that probably most people would find, even wherever you're falling on the spectrum of all those things that you brought up earlier, that at the end of the day, we all pretty much want the same things. We just think there's different ways of getting there. So, okay. Would you also say this is a good time to seal up energy leaks? So to find places where our energy is leaking and to do what we can to kind of seal those things up, whether it's having a conversation or saying no to a certain activity or a certain person. Would you say that this is good energy for that as well?
Sure. I would say that one doesn't need to wait for a good time to do that. But yes, because as Mars heats up, it's like if we imagine a dam, and Mars is the river that's flowing. It's what Freud called the id. It's the energy that's just expressing. And Saturn is the dam that's been built on the river. And so one can say, well, the water behind the dam is just stagnant, but it's not. It's building power so it can be diverted, and so that it can be used for making hydroelectricity or feeding, flooding a farmland for watering vegetables or orchards. But the thing is that we can't build up the power if the dam is leaking. Mm. And often we go through life, and especially people who have either an over-amping Mars or an under-amping Mars, people with Mars in mutable signs like the changeable signs, like Gemini, maybe not so much Virgo, but Sagittarius and Pisces. It's easy for that energy to just leak to Mars and Gemini. Do this, do that, do this. Okay, what about that? I like that, and not think about how much energy one has, because that dam of Saturn, which Mars is squaring, acts like a capacitor in an electric circuit. And a capacitor is this weird thing that you have alternating current going back and forth, hundreds of millions or even gigahertz, hundreds of trillions of times every second. And a capacitor is like a semiconductor that lets the electricity pass one way, but when it goes back the other, it builds like it puts it in the bank. And after it does that 20 times, 40 million times, every capacitor is rated differently. But when it reaches a certain amount, then the capacitor blows the charge, like lightning striking. And that's the way we tune a radio. I mean, that's the way we get the frequency of a radio. It used to be with a mechanical set of metal plates that interconnected, and they actually, they were called variable condensers or variable capacitors. And that's how we would set the frequency for 570 cycles per second, kilohertz, 1,000 cycles per second, or 1040, 1,440 thousand cycles a second, or 89.3 FM radio, and that's 89.3 million cycles a second. It would be tuning that capacitor. So in a way, if our capacitor isn't tuned, where basically our frequencies are all over the map and we're not storing enough energy to release the charge and be effective. So yes, plug those leaks.
Okay, nice. All right. It's so hard to switch topics, but I think we should. So that yeah, exactly. We're going to turn the station. So we have been collecting some questions from the audience, and we're going to cover a few of them here. The first one is, many of us have heard the statement that we are made of star stuff. Yeah. We are literally made of star stuff. And so someone asked, is there scientific evidence that is actually true, that we are actually made of the same stuff as the stars?
Yes. And this is an interesting quote. There's a wonderful site on the internet that is a site that over the years, because for a couple of decades, in my daily horoscope or daily Planet Pulse columns, I use quotations. And there's a wonderful site called quoteinvestigator.com that actually resulted in a book, and the title of the book is Hemingway Didn't Say That. And it's all these quotes that we give to people that aren't necessarily that person. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have said that, there's people who everyone attributes quotes to. Mark Twain, Albert Einstein, Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's like he said more things than he could have ever said in real life. But Quote Investigator informs me, and it's a very scholarly site, that Carl Sagan's "We Are Made of Star Stuff," which he said in 1973 while he was doing the Cosmos for PBS, that what he said was, our sun is a second or third generation star. All of the rocky and metallic material we stand on, the iron, Mars, in our blood, the calcium, that would be Saturn, related to Saturn, in our teeth, the carbon in our genes were produced billions and billions of years ago in the interior of a red giant star. We are made of star stuff. That was what Carl Sagan said, and it was an important bringing that concept out. But the whole idea of using spectroscopes to analyze the light of stars and to show what they are made of actually does show that there are common earth metals that are burning in our sun and in suns and stars all over the place. But what's interesting is that you can go back to 1918, and the president of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada delivered a speech, and he said, "Our bodies are made of star stuff." Exact quote from his talk. And it's really weird because it's like it's come out again and again. We're all made of dust, but it's stardust. Astronomers talk about how all the elements that are in the body were all part of the original Big Bang, which became a star which exploded into galaxies and that were filled with stars. And this energy is constantly moving and swirling. And so, yes, every human is made of star stuff. But what's interesting also, and another person who also said something about this was the Nobel laureate Doris Lessing, who wrote some fantasy and science fiction and brilliant essays. And in her novel, A Briefing for a Descent into Hell, she wrote, "No one knows what has existed and has vanished beyond recovery. Evidence for the number of times man has understood and has forgotten again that his mind and flesh and life and movements are made of star stuff, sun stuff, planet stuff." That was in 1971, prior to Carl Sagan's. But I think the winner of this whole investigation is a guy who wrote a couple of books that I became enamored with 30 years ago. The guy's name is Guy Murchie, and he wrote a book called the Music of the Spheres, and he wrote another book called The Seven Mysteries of Life. And he was just a quirky, brilliant writer. And in his book, he quoted an ancient Serbian proverb. And the proverb is this: "Be humble, for you are made of dung. Be noble, for you are made of stars."
Ooh.
Now, it goes back, and apparently there are some very, ancient sayings that have to do with the idea of us having pieces of stars within all of us. And yet here's my take on this. Mechanically, it has been shown that the circulation of atoms that are so tiny is huge, that every time we take a breath, we're breathing in atoms that Moses, Jesus, Lao Tzu, Adolf Hitler breathed in, some of the atoms that we're actually breathing in, that there's a huge amount of movement and circulation. And so, yes, we are made of the same stuff that stars are made of. But here's another piece of it. And that is that what are the metals made of? What are the atoms made of? And as we go into these deeper and deeper realms of the microcosm, we understand that Pythagoras was right when he said that everything consists of vibration. From that standpoint, he also said everything, all vibrations arise in sympathetic harmony to other vibrations. So yes, this is part of why astrology works, is we have the appearance of being physical. The table in front of me, the desk, has the appearance of being physical, but these are just the illusion of physicality is a result of high frequency. And when I say high frequency, I mean hundreds and thousands of trillions of vibrations per second at the atomic level of these high frequency vibrations intersecting with each other, like the moon's orbit, its frequency intersects with the Earth's orbit around the sun to create the nodes of the moon. Well, everything that's physical is a node. The word node it's Latin for knot. And so reality ties itself up in knots. The vibrations make these knots that give us the illusion of reality. Albert Einstein, who did say this, he said reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. That something seems to be real and three-dimensional, like stars, like our bodies, but we're vibration, and everything vibrates with everything else. So there again, we are the stuff of stars, we're the stuff of galaxies, we're the stuff of the dung heap, we're the stuff of, of light and of everything. So that's the long and the short answer there. But the interesting thing is that even the ratios of some of the metals in our body our body, they say, contains about 2 or 3 grams of iron and about 3 equal amount of white, silver, white magnesium, which burns at room temperature, and smaller amounts of manganese and smaller amounts of copper and gold. And all these elements are required. I mean, the idea of having a heart of gold, there is gold in our body, and yes, it goes to the heart. And astrologically, all the planets relate to these different metals. The sun relates to gold, and the moon to silver. And without silver compounds on the retinas of our eyes, we wouldn't receive and be able to hold light. In fact, until digital photography, silver bromide was needed on film to make film capture the light. So the moon, which is silver, and silver relates to the moon, is about that holding and reflecting of light. And copper being Venus, and iron being Mars, and tin being Jupiter, and lead being Saturn, and Mercury being Mercury. These correspondences are brilliant, but the proportion of some of these metals in our body are in similar proportion in size to what these metals are within stars. We are made of star stuff.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to Ruth's chart. Can we look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg's chart and see what made this woman so interesting? And
well, we can, and what I would probably like to do here is just very briefly share my screen so that we can actually see this chart. And with a little luck, I will share the right screen here, and you should see a chart in front of you.
Yes, we do.
And this is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, born in Brooklyn, New York, March 15th, 1933. We do not have a time of day for her. What that means is we don't have the use of houses, because it's the time of day connected with the location that gives us the horizon. So we know that when she was born, she was a Pisces with the sun in the at about 24 degrees of Pisces, because the sun only moves 1 degree every day. I ran this for noon, so we know the sun is going to be within a half a degree plus or minus as to where it is in this chart. And all the other planets are similar to that, except for the moon, because the moon moves fast enough that the moon can move 12 to 13 degrees in a day. But at noon, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's moon, her moon at noon, that rhymes, her moon at noon was at 12 degrees of Scorpio. And so that means that her moon would be between 6 degrees less than that, roughly between 6 degrees and 18 degrees of Scorpio. So there's no question, even though we don't have a time for her, we know she had an intense, passionate, fierce, even extreme Scorpio moon. She had this Pisces sun with Venus in Pisces, and she had Pluto in Cancer. This is a grand water trine by sign. In fact, she also had the North Node in Pisces. And so she was very compassionate. That's a Piscean trait. She was very visionary. She was in some ways very, I want to say boundless, but the openness of Pisces energy and the intensity of that Scorpio moon. But here's the interesting thing about her chart. She was born with Mercury retrograde in Aries. Now, Mercury retrograde, remember, that means Mercury was closer to Earth than it is at other times in its cycle. And often when a planet is close to Earth and retrograde and loud, it's like Mars being retrograde now. We get so angry, we don't know what to do with it. We shut it down and it goes into repression or suppression and then projection. Well, one could argue that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's retrograde Mercury in Aries was focused into her writing and speaking that made her such a fierce warrior, because Aries is the warrior sign. Aries is combative. It can be contentious. Aries is the sign when planets are in Aries. Those planets are not afraid of engagement in confrontation. Incidentally, she also had Uranus, the rebellious, the ingenious, the eccentric, futuristic planet, also in Aries. And so that Aries energy made her an absolute fierce warrior. But here's the interesting thing. You look at this green line connecting her Mercury in Aries at 7 degrees of Aries, and you go here to 5.5 degrees, 6, 7, 8 degrees of Virgo, and Virgo to Aries is a quincunx. That's 150 degrees. It's the aspect of irritation that forces us to do things again, but we then develop something that's very different and very powerful and very unique, but it begins as an annoyance, as an irritation, and it's a need to constantly adjust. And what are these planets in Virgo? It's Mars in Virgo. Mars is Aries planet. Her Mercury in Aries, her Mercury, the writer, the communicator in Aries, looks to Mars to do its work, because Mars is the key planet of Aries, and Mars is in Virgo, being exact and focused and detailed, and Mars then also retrograde looks to Mercury, because Mercury is the planet that rules or is connected with Virgo. And so Mercury and Mars are said to be in mutual reception. This is an old Hellenistic word, and this mutual reception means that each planet is receiving the energy of the other, almost like passing cards under the table. They don't look like they're really connected by a smooth aspect, but because they are mutually receiving one another's energy, there's a constancy between that fighter, angry, contentious Rider Mercury in Aries, and that's Mars's sign. And Mars in Virgo says, when I write, I can use my laser beam and get exactly critical. I can pull out the right precedents, the right research. And of course, her moon in Scorpio. Scorpio is the sign of the researcher. That's the person who's going to dig beneath the surface. And we look at that moon, it's widely trine to Pluto, which is trine to the sun, Pluto being the modern ruler of Scorpio. And Pluto is square Uranus, the rebellious, the radical. And here we see again the importance of the deep research. Interestingly enough, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is coming up to her third Saturn return, because Saturn right now in Capricorn is moving back around for the third time to where her Saturn was when she was born in Aquarius. And that's the Saturn in Aquarius is interesting because ancient astrologers said Saturn was the ruler of Aquarius. We moderners say, nope, Uranus has kind of taken over that job. They really both have some function there. But the concept is that Saturn is the authority and the rule giver. And in Capricorn, Saturn basically is the authority of having to follow the rules, whether you give them or given to you by authority. In Aquarius, what happens is that the Aquarius Saturn knows the rules and knows where they can be broken. This is genius. This is science. This is technology. That's why Uranus, the planet of breaking rules and going into the future, is given to Aquarius. But it is also Saturn's function. And her Saturn in Aquarius is 90 degrees, is squared to the moon in Scorpio, which gives her the ability to be dispassionate about things she is passionate over, because that Scorpio energy, the Scorpio moon, is passion, and the Aquarius energy is the detached intellect, conceptual, and the futuristic, and Saturn there gives her the ability to work with that energy. So this is just a sense and a flavor. It's amazing to me. I do know some other things about her personal life, but just judging what she's done and how she's done it and the consistency of which she's faced difficulty and overcome it, difficulty of being, one of a few women in a law school class to being only one of two women Supreme Court justices ever, and to being both the person that is absolutely compassionate for the inclusion of everyone. People don't really get that even before she was a justice on the Supreme Court, she was arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court. And without Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women wouldn't have the right to have credit cards or to get a hotel room without a signature from their husband. I mean, this is a woman who has championed not only feminine rights and civil rights, but also rights of anyone who is in love to be recognized, whether it's gay rights or transgender rights and so on. And of course, we look here and we also see the fact that she has Neptune mixed into that Virgo cluster, and this is the visionary, and Neptune and even Jupiter opposite Venus. This is the person who wants love for everyone. Everyone is included, everyone is invited, and everyone has the legal right to be there.
Very cool. Okay, thank you, Rick.
Let me unshare my screen.
There were people asking about the timing of her passing or the timing of her transition. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but whether or not that can be seen astrologically.
Yeah, my experience is I know astrologers who claim that they can look at a chart and tell when someone's going to die, and yet I've seen those people be wrong. And it's not something that I would ever want to be wrong about if I was going to be telling someone when they were going to die. When my daughter was born many, many, many moons ago, I was a young upstart, knew-it-all astrologer. I knew when she was going to be born because we knew when we conceived, and I kind of fine-tuned it, and I was totally wrong. And then I said, well, maybe here, and I was wrong again. And it turns out that she was a full 10-month term baby, which is not as uncommon as we think. And we were outside of the medical system, and our midwife basically said, it's okay, and it was okay. But the point here is that I do not believe that astrology can pinpoint birth or death. It can open up doors as to when those may happen, but that doesn't mean it will. And I mean, we can look, for example, we could look at where Neptune is now, and one of the fascinating things that I have come to realize, many other astrologers have also, is that although we associate Saturn with being the Grim Reaper, Father Time, it is Satan, it is the, you go here or there, heaven or hell. We associate Pluto with death because Pluto, excuse me, Pluto is the lord of the hell realms. Often what happens is that Saturn and Pluto show up in the charts of loved ones who are left here. Often the person who actually is leaving their body, who is disincarnating, often is in the midst of a Neptune or Jupiter transit. They're being released. They're going on a long journey.
Wow.
So, and I've seen this over and over again. Obviously, there are some people who die of an accident and it's sudden, and there may be a Uranian involvement, or in physical fighting, there may be a Martian involvement. But often in healthy deaths, whatever that means, often you see Jupiter involved. And we look at her chart with the Pluto at 21 degrees. I know it's not on the screen anymore, it's on my screen. We look at Pluto in her chart at 21 degrees of Cancer, and Pluto in the sky right now is retrograding from 22 back to 21 degrees of Capricorn. And so she has that Capricorn mix that's opposite her Pluto, and Mars is squaring it. So there's certainly some tension going on, but I think the real culprit, if there is one, is the fact that Neptune in the sky has been moving through Pisces, and Neptune has therefore is right now at the exact, or close to the exact, halfway point between her Venus in Pisces and her Sun in Pisces. And so, it's like, when you get to be of a certain age, there are things that come up and you may just take it as an exit. I did not run a chart for the moment of her death. I don't care. I mean, I care. I don't mind as to what it is. I'm happy to step back and look at the whole thing. Yeah, I don't know if that evaded the question completely.
No.
I mean, there certainly are connections that I see in looking at a chart for now and looking at her birth or natal chart. I've not run progressions. We do not have an accurate time for her, so we don't even know the transits to the moon exactly. But I don't think that astrology can find mechanically a point of someone's death, especially because in this world, we may have died of natural causes and then have had medical technology interfere that basically gave us a new lease on life once, twice, three times. And so we have kind of messed with the natural order of both birth, Caesareans, and hormones like Pitocin to increase the labor process. We've increased our amount of intervention with both birthing and deathing, if you will, both incarnating and disincarnating. I know astrologers who can look at a chart and say, I have a feeling that this person is going to pass, in February of blah, 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 or at age, 78 or whatever. I think information is accessible. Everything that's ever happened and everything that ever will happen is out there somehow. Now, whether you do it astrologically or whether you look at a chart and it blinks you into some place where you then pick the fruit off the tree, I think when an astrologer who is predicting an event like death predicts it accurately, I don't think it's astrology. I think it's something else.
Okay, a couple really interesting things you said there, though, that what you have been able to see consistently is that Jupiter and Neptune are more associated with birth, with death for the person dying, and that Saturn and Pluto are more prominent for the people that are left behind, which is really interesting because it just sort of tweaks our perception of what death is.
Yeah.
And
my father died on a Saturn transit to my chart, and it was finality of that relationship to me.
Right.
But he, and in fact, many people who watch this know my old astrology buddy, partner in crime, Jeff Jower, who disincarnated about 5 years ago. And he passed out of this plane almost to the moment on a very smooth Jupiter trine. And his passing was magical. I mean, I still miss the guy, but there was something about his going that it was his moment and away he went. And my last words to him were bon voyage. It's like, that's what he was doing. He was going on this journey that was going to free him from the constraints of being in this plane. So, and astrologers that I know have noted this again and again and again. And then there are astrologers like Maurice Fernandez who have done really good work on looking at a chart and how a death chart and a disincarnation chart and how it relates to the birth or incarnation chart. And there's something karmic here that then kind of maybe transitions us into a question that I think is sitting out there, and that's about evolutionary astrology.
Wait, before you go there though, before you go to evolutionary, can we just real briefly touch on, because that is going to be the next question, but can we briefly touch on something you also brought up, which was about birth time? Because I know this comes up, especially for a lot of women or people who have been, have had a C-section and or were born via C-section. Does that mean their birth time isn't accurate because it was manipulated? Or do you see that as the soul chose the time, knew that it was going to be a C-section, so it's still the birth time?
When we say the soul chose the time and knew, what we're doing is we're attributing human actions of cognition and knowing to something that is, what's the word, extra human. It's beyond, it's like extrasensory, it's extra carnal, it's beyond the body. I don't know if that thinking works that way, but here's my observation. My observation is that the moment of birth, where the being, the baby, is no longer contained within the rhythms and insulation, if you will, in the amniotic fluids, floating in the sac, protected, almost like a Faraday cage that's protecting the baby from all the external vibrations, that when that cord is cut and the baby takes its first and often cries, especially if it's been whacked, that something happens in that moment. And that moment is somehow tied genetically, resonantly, sympathetically to the moment of conception, to the DNA, to the ancestors, to the function and purpose and goal of that soul. How does that work? Beats me, but it does. And so um, I've seen again and again charts of people born born via Caesarean section, and their charts undoubtedly are accurate. Their ascendant works. You can time events to their ascendant, but one might guess or assume that perhaps the natural energies are muddled a bit. Doesn't mean they're incorrect. It doesn't mean they don't work. But again, we interfere with natural vibrations all the time. That's what one of the things we do. And we are not separate from nature. We are part of nature. So when we interfere with nature's vibrations, that's nature interfering with her own vibrations. And so, yeah, I think birth times are accurate and they work. And there's something, Bruce Lipton, I don't know whether he talks about this in The Biology of Belief or whether this just came from conversations that I've had with him. But when he was a research fellow at Stanford University doing work in immunology and blood chemistry, kind of HIV, AIDS, immune system research work, one of the things that he noted that, and this is kind of really how he and I first met back in the early 90s, one of the things that he noted was that when a newborn baby presented, that if they needed a skin graft or an organ graft, if that was done right away, there would be no problem. It would be accepted by the body. But by about 4 to 6, 8 hours, I don't remember the exact number, that 6 hours after birth, if you tried to do that same skin graft, the baby would reject the and in order to do a skin graft or an organ implant or anything of that sort, technologies were developed that involved immunosuppressants. In other words, if we were going to do a heart transplant on a grown adult, as opposed to a brand new born baby, we'd have to use drugs to suppress the immune system, because somehow within the first few hours of being alive, the baby develops, not in language, but somehow energetically, it develops the ability to know whether a cell was made inside or outside. And that's what our immune system is. Our immune system is the basic chemical level of our boundaries. And so when we have a functioning immune system, we know that anything made within our boundaries, within our immune system, is likely safe. We may make too much or not enough of some substance, but the fact is that that's different than a virus or something that comes in from the outside. And if our immune system is functioning, our being knows the difference between the inside and the outside. This is why the whole COVID pandemic happening on the exact date of a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That was when the genome was announced, and that was the first documented mortality, was on January 12th, the day of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Saturn is about boundaries, and Pluto is about when boundaries bump into one another and they dissolve. They metamorphosize, if you will. And so the virus, in a way, is about our boundaries being invaded physically, just like often a war is about boundaries being invaded and the skirmishes that happen to reestablish that. So there's something here about that moment of birth, which actually defines the beginning of the being system to create what we call identity. And it reminds me of one of the books by Noel Till, who passed back in January, I guess in December, was called The Horoscope of Identity. The Horoscope as Identity, The Horoscope of Identity. Now but the word identity was in the book title, because that's when we look at a horoscope, that's what we're looking at. we're looking at the identity of that being or that soul.
Okay. So good. I mean, these are some questions that I know have been coming up for a lot of people. So it's amazing that we're going to cover them all in one episode. All right. So we were about to go into evolutionary astrology. You were talking about Maurice Fernandez's work and how he's done a lot of work on basically the way I understood it, the correlation between the birth time and the death time and the evolution of the soul. So the question that originally came in is, are you an evolutionary astrologer, and will evolutionary astrology be in the Astrology Foundation's course? So if we can tie those two things together, that'd be great.
Yes. Tricky question, because I had a person in my life who told me many times, and this person would not call themselves an astrologer, although they were a very competent astrologer, because they said, a God defined is a God confined. I avoid the label of being an evolutionary astrologer because to me it is confining. Now, that doesn't mean that it's confining to someone who's working within that structure. For those of you who don't know, let's just describe briefly what evolutionary astrology is. As far as I'm concerned, I'm evolutionary and I'm an astrologer. Therefore, I must be an evolutionary astrologer. But when you ask an astrologer, are you an evolutionary astrologer? You're really asking them, are you of the school that began with the work of Jeff Green, now known as Jeffrey Green, but Jeff Green, who wrote a book called Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. And remember, Pluto was only discovered in 1930. And in the 1960s, when I was first learning astrology, I was reading the astrology of a man named Carl Payne Toby, a very brilliant astrologer. And Carl Payne Toby was one of the last holdouts, and he was making a very strong case for the fact that this newly discovered, by then it was only 30 years old, this newly discovered planet Pluto actually ruled Aries, and Mars should stick with Scorpio because Mars is a nocturnal planet in the Greek tradition, and Scorpio is a nocturnal energy and a feminine water sign, and therefore Pluto is the real ruler of Aries. Now, my point here is that Pluto was still being figured out. And when Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, and we get into this in the Foundations of Astrology course that I know we'll come back and mention toward the end, but I get into this on a deeper level because in the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s, we discovered 3 new planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And they were all given associations to signs that had already been associated with another planet. For example, Pluto was given to Scorpio, where Mars was doing fine as the Scorpio ruler. And Saturn was replaced in Aquarius. Uranus was given to Aquarius, which kind of shunted Saturn out of the realms of science and innovation. And Neptune was given to Pisces, which took Jupiter out of the realms of emotional spirituality and belief and put him more as the adventurer in Sagittarius. So Jeff Green's book, I know he formally began calling Jeffrey Green, but I knew him as Jeff Green, so I say that without even thinking. Jeffrey Green wrote this book called Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. And it was really the first book that opened astrologers' minds. Remember, astrologers in the 1800s, even in the 1900s, were doing charts without these newfangled planets because they worked for thousands of years, stopping at Saturn, and maybe these new planets weren't important. You couldn't see them anyhow, you know? So Jeff's book basically opened modern astrologers' eyes to the importance of Pluto. Now, we have to go back to the concept that to the ancients, Saturn was considered to be the gateway of the soul. Saturn was the difference between the three-dimensional world of what's here and whatever it is that's on the other side. And when the soul incarnated, according to the Greeks, it came through the gate of Saturn. This is Lucifer, the fallen angel, falling through the gates of Saturn and becoming material. Saturn, Satan. It's Satan becoming the dark side of light, if you will, because it's in three dimensions. So Saturn was the ultimate gatekeeper. And there was nothing that mattered out past Saturn. And Jeffrey Green changed the name of that game and said, no, the soul comes in through Pluto. And Pluto moves so slowly that unlike Saturn and even the moon, which where it is by sign, since Pluto can stay in the same sign for years, for decades, well, Jeffrey posed the idea that Pluto, by house and by how it was aspected, really became the entry point of the soul into this lifetime. And between using Pluto and its opposite point, and using the nodes, which are not quote unquote real planets, but there's something mechanistically that's real there. And the nodes are real enough that in Hindu and Indian astrology, we Westerners reduce the nodes to, oh, they're mathematical points. In Vedic astrology or Jyotish, they say that just because you can't see it doesn't make it less important. And they call it a shadow planet, which is a great name for a great word to describe the nodes. It still has pull. It's a graha. It still has energy that pulls you away from the emptiness or the void. So Jeff's work basically set in motion what became known as evolutionary astrology, based upon the title of this book, Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. And evolutionary astrology basically says that the horoscope is a map of the soul's curriculum in this lifetime, having been this life and that life and then this life and now this life, and between understanding Pluto and the nodes, which have a south node past and a north node future, it gives one a sense of the directionality of this evolution. And there's more to it. I'm totally simplifying it. But all those things that I've stated that are parts of evolutionary astrology work for me. I use them. I use them in my astrology. On the other hand, I'm not sure that the directionality of the nodes is quite as real as we put on it, because we live in a body and we have a timeline. We're born and we die. At least that's the way it seems. But if you look at this from a Hindu or Buddhist perspective, time is either in cycles, or the Buddhists would say everything that's ever happened is happening now, and everything that ever will happen is happening now. And that kind of shifts the gears a little bit on past lives. I know we've talked about this a little bit here, but the idea that past lives are not necessarily in the past, they're in the present. Does that make it any less useful or any less valid? No, but I don't build my entire chart work on that singular concept. Although I have no problem at all if you do. And in fact, it's certainly incorporated into my teaching. And I should even take it a step further, that many of the practicing evolutionary astrologers, Stephen Forrest as one, Maurice Fernandez, there are Eric Myers, there are many evolutionary astrologers who are absolutely brilliant astrologers, many of them who have been, inner circle guides on the Astrology Hub. And I totally value evolutionary astrology as a school of thought, but I do my best to incorporate many schools of thought. And so, yes, I'm an evolutionary astrologer, but I also practice the Huber method, Huber astrology, also David Cochran's vibrational astrology, also my quantum astrology, also, and so I don't like to confine myself or my teachings to any one school, even though it might be a very useful and valid school. And there are so many excellent astrologers that have been through their training as evolutionary astrologers who are doing really, really good work.
Okay, so to answer the second part of the question, do you teach evolutionary astrology concepts in the Astrology Foundation's course?
Yeah, but I don't necessarily distinguish them as specifically evolutionary astrology. But yes, because I do rely heavily on the outer transpersonal planets. You know, one of the downfalls of thinking of Pluto being the gateway of the soul, just like we used to think that Saturn was, is, well, now there's Eris and Make, and there's many other things. And it turns out that these absolute points may not be as absolute. They work. They're, you know, and Pluto isn't the only planet of its type. It's a whole class of planets. Like Chiron is a whole class of what we call centaurs. And so, yeah, I'll be incorporating some evolutionary astrology concepts and tools and techniques. I'm very comfortable in those realms. I find myself at conferences and invited to conferences where, I've spoken at conferences that were put on by Maurice or by Kaipacha, who are self-identified evolutionary astrologers. And I'm very comfortable in those realms, but I do not call myself. I call myself an evolutionary astrologer only because the alternative is you're not evolutionary, and I am evolutionary.
Nice. All right, you guys. Well,
I'm evolutionary and I'm also revolutionary.
Yes, you are. Absolutely. And I have actually started to take the course. I know those of you who are signed up are chomping at the bit to get access, but I've actually gotten to start the course that Rick is creating. And what is so amazing about it is that it truly does accomplish something very, very challenging, which is to accommodate both a beginner student and a more advanced student. And
it's my favorite thing to do. When I do retreats, I love having 20 students for a week where 5 of them are practicing professionals, 5 of them barely know their sun sign, and the others are all in the middle somewhere. That is my singular favorite group to teach to.
It is genius. And because we say that, and then I'm taking the class, making sure that what we're saying is absolutely on par, and that I can stand up here and say to beginners, yes, you're going to be able to get something from this class. And I can say to advanced students, yes, you're going to be able to get something from this class. And I can honestly say that 1,000,000,000%, because you're getting that foundation, and Rick is bringing in so many aspects of history and even Myers-Briggs and some of the different things that astrology is tied into, that there's going to be new things. There's going to be nuggets of information that you're going to be able to take away no matter what level you're at. So I'm really, really excited about the course, and it's coming soon. I mean, we're only like a week and a half away really from the first module being released. So if you're interested in joining us for that, you can reserve your spot now. It's at astrologyhub.com/foundations. This is going to help you have those building blocks to astrology. If you're brand new, you're totally going to be able to hang, I promise. And like I just said, if you're more advanced, you're going to get a lot of new information, new perspectives, and different ways to practice your craft, which is always so exciting. So the first module is released October 4th. You can sign up now, reserve your spot, and get access to several of the bonuses that we're offering with the class, including the mastery class on quincunxes that Rick did for the Astrology Hub's Inner Circle. So you'll have access to that. Inner Circle members do receive a discount. So do Rick's Patreon members. So make sure that you check your respective portals where you get your information for the discount code. If you're an Inner Circle member or a Patreon member, this is our way of saying thank you for being in that core part of our community. Thank you so much for supporting our work. And I also wanted to thank all of you who are participating in the Pay It Forward Fund, which is so heartening to see so many of you paying it forward and making this course accessible to those who may not be able to afford it at this moment. So thank you for that. That is really, really beautiful to see. And Rick, is there anything else you want to add about the class? Anything else you want to add about life, about astrology, anything?
Yeah, I'd like to add something about life.
Okay.
And that is, we're here, it began, it ends from this perspective. And, we need to do what we can along the way to keep it going and do the best we can to contribute to the greater whole without stimulating unnecessary anger, confrontation, and yet stand up for our boundaries. I mean, that's anger management is really what this phase is all about. It's making use of that energy in some sort of positive way. Yeah. And I'm excited about the course. I'm now, I've put together all of the rough parts of the modules. I've recorded the first two modules completely recorded. And I'm just really excited about how the ideas and the things that I've put together on paper are actually translating into the program itself.
And this is going to be different than listening to us every week, which I am so happy that so many of you enjoy. But how it's different is it's going to be very, very organized. It's like taking all of Rick's, not all of your knowledge, obviously, but so much of Rick's knowledge and understanding and the way he practices astrology and putting it into very organized teachings.
Structure.
So it's structure. It's very Saturnian in that way. So, and when you were talking about your instruction for life, Rick, I was thinking about the word mastery. I mean, so much of this year to me seems to be an invitation to step into new levels of mastery right now around anger management and tension and conflict. And like you said earlier on, I'll go back to your 6 things for dealing with Mars square Saturn in a productive way. Don't stir the pot just to exacerbate. Don't just spout out our energy or let it fire off in ways that are going to create more conflict for no purpose. To finding common ground and seeking ways to find it with each other and with the people in your life, and then being kind and practicing compassion. So we can leave with those 3 things. And Rick, thank you so much. And this is our second Q&A format. I love it, just to throw in here and there.
Yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It allows us to cover a lot of different topics in one session.
And you didn't mention, although anyone who goes onto the site will see this, that in each week's lessons, the 4 half-hour lessons a week, the Friday of that week, the curriculum or the material will be released on Sunday. And on Friday afternoons for 5 weeks, we will have a live Zoom Q&A where people will get to submit their questions and kind of doing what we're doing now, but really structured and only for those people who are in the course. And
Yes.
It'll be Q&A questions on the course material rather than on,
on anything.
What do you think about, a 1957 Chevy?
They're pretty cool. But what I was also going to say to that, people have been asking, if I can't join now, can I join later? And the answer is yes, you can join later. The benefit of joining now is this live Q&A element that we probably won't offer ever again. We'll definitely take the recordings and put it into the product itself. But this real live experience, this is probably going to be the only time that you get to have that as part of the class. So it's up to you. You can wait. And I know for some people have reasons why they need to wait, and that's okay. You're still going to get to benefit from the course. But if you do want that live aspect, now's the time to get it. So again, astrologyhub.com/foundations. We're super excited to have you in class. Rick, thank you so much for another amazing week of the Cosmic Connection.
Thanks. It's been fun. It's always fun.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for being here, for tuning into the Astrology Hub content, for being a part of our community, and as always, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Have a great weekend, everybody.